next guests have teamed up to deliver one of the most anticipated thrillers of the year, a book Brad Thor called an absolutely amazing thriller and Lee Child called an instant classic, maybe an instant legend. One is a combat decorated Navy SEAL sniper turned entrepreneur who was the head instructor at the Navy SEAL Sniper School, which produced some of America's most legendary snipers. The other is a co author of more than 30 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers and 5 national bestsellers. Together, they have been writing as a team for more than a decade now. Brandon and John, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Good intro, Ryan.
First take, too. I'm just saying.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
Brandon, obviously you had a really storied career in the military, which I'd like to ask more about in just a little bit. First, though, so now that you're entering the fiction waters, literally, by the way, as we can see from John's background there, how was your background in the military helped you when writing a thriller like Steel Fear? And this is always fascinating to me because there are guys like Brad Thor and Vince Flynn who didn't serve, but have managed to capture that life pretty well. And then you have the Brad Taylors who know that life front and back, and they write it just as well too, right? So did you find yourself drawing on your own experiences when crafting this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think John would agree with me that any good story writer or teller has good life experience, right? Like has traveled, and I mean, look at somebody like Hemingway, right? So I definitely draw on my experience in the military, and in particular with Steel Fear. This was, largely based on real events. When I was rescue swimmer before becoming a SEAL, I was attached to a helicopter squadron, HS-6 out of San Diego, deployed on 2 different aircraft carriers, both the Lincoln and the Kitty Hawk. And when I was on the Lincoln, they just integrated women onto the aircraft carrier, and so the Navy was dealing with all sorts of logistics. Where do we house the women? How do we have men and women on the same ship and not fraternize? And then we had this like sexual predator that I think assaulted 6, 7 women and never caught. And I remember having this conversation with one of my friends, Mona Easley, who was a pilot in HS-6, and we were flying circles next to the aircraft there. And she was telling me how terrifying it was to know that this person was like let loose on the ship and there's nowhere to run, right? And the fact that they never caught this guy is kind of crazy too. And that planted the seed for Steel Fear, over 15 years ago. And something, John and I talked about when we first started working together. I asked him, like, what do you think of this idea? And he's like, I think there's something there. And so it took us over 10 years to have the time, because as you guys both know well, you can't just sell fiction as an idea the same way you can sell it to a publisher as nonfiction. I mean, off a 1-page proposal, you have to turn in polished work. And one of the things I think that make John and I a good team is we're able to kind of draw on my military experience and John's experience as an amazing writer, and kind of fill that Tom Clancy gap, which I think nobody is really has. Like, Brad Thor is an amazing writer, but there's a few of these guys that can write really well, but nobody's kind of filling the shoes of Tom Clancy, in my opinion. And I was a huge Clancy fan as a kid and an adult. And that's something I think we're bringing to the table, as well as we're kind of mixing genres with this, military kind of action plus the thriller aspect. So anyway, long answer, but
no, it's a good one though. It's a really good one. Thank you.
Yeah, I had kind of a secret weapon too in my part, because it's one thing to get to know your co-writer, but Brandon and I have been writing books for 10 years. So I knew so much about his background that I could just pluck out just little events, incidents, characters that had nothing to do with, the aircraft carrier, but to drop them into the book. So there's a lot of his experiences kind of peppered through the story.
And especially the I was reading that tweet you sent earlier, John, about the leadership. There is a lot of leadership lessons in this book that was drawn on actual experience on the Abraham Lincoln. Like the captain was very much like our captain in the book, and you see this like good leadership, bad leadership. So it's interesting. Like there are a lot of you could teach a leadership class off Steel Freer, I think, very easily.
So I love that you two have created classic closed door mystery on an aircraft carrier, which those things are huge. So it's basically like bigger than a small town. And I wondered, like, if you could maybe give us some insight into how you developed the various suspects. And did you have to go back and thread in some clues and red herrings as you wrote?
Totally. I mean, yes. I mean, I don't know how it is for anybody else, but I mean, this is our first novel of any kind. So, let alone being our first thriller. And for me, anyhow, I know that we had a premise starting out, but there were a lot of building blocks to the way it worked out that we didn't have starting out. I'm an outliner personally, but even so, there was a ton that I didn't know. I don't think either of us knew, when we started writing it. So there are people are they suspects? Are they? Did they do it? I mean, anyway. And so yeah, I mean, for sure, going back, dropping clues earlier, pulling threads this way, and that way. It was like a big malleable piece of clay from the moment we started until the moment it was our agent said yes, it's done.
Even I feel like, all right, Alyssa at Paradigm and Ann Spire, our editor at Random House, they had incredible feedback, like saying, look, you need to pick up the pace earlier, you need to drop more clues earlier just to get people on the hook. So I think that there's something said to having an amazing relationship with your agent and editor.
Couldn't agree more. Actually, I think the interaction and the feedback and the honesty up front is amazing. So did you guys know who was going to be the perpetrator, or did that come out throughout the writing?
We knew that.
Yeah, that one was.
Okay. And was one last sort of follow up on that? Was there anything kind of interesting that you learned about aircraft carriers? Because I think all of us find it kind of very fascinating, and not many of us have a chance to go on one.
I think that's you, John.
Well, okay, sure. I mean, Brandon lived on this. I mean, actually, the ship, the Abraham Lincoln, where the story takes place, he lived on that ship for 6 months. So, I mean, I think he knows it really, really well. For me, I had to, you talk about Brad Thor, Vince Flynn. I have no military background, let alone naval background. I had to learn everything I could about that ship from the inside out. It was all new to me. I actually spent some time on the Lincoln physically, getting to know it a little bit. But to me, what was just amazing was how vast it is. Just this vast labyrinth, and you'd think, or you might think that the passageways all go like straight down, like a column right through the ship, right? But no, they go for 20 feet and then they jar left and they go right and then they go this way and that way. It's like an ant farm, only in 3 dimensions. And I heard someone told a story where they were on a 6-month tour with their brother, and the two of them never saw each other the whole 6 months. We actually tucked that into the book. That was a true story. And when you spend time on that craft, you can imagine it. You can imagine how that could actually happen. So finding the killer is one thing. Finding the killer on that thing is like, oh man, talk about a needle in a haystack.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good, though. Before Steel Fear, obviously you guys released a bunch of mega popular best-selling nonfiction books. From The Killing School, one of my personal favorites, Brandon, Mastering Fear, Total Focus, etc. You guys have been super successful with nonfiction. I'm getting the sense that, Brandon, you always wanted to do a thriller. So what made you take the jump now? Why was now the right time?
I honestly, writing was never something that as a kid, I'm like, oh, I want to grow up one day and be a writer. It was just something that I fell into and found that I really enjoyed it after my military career. And I felt like I had some substance to add in nonfiction after I served. And then it just got to the point where I felt like, okay, I've said all I wanted to say. The only other kind of nonfiction, there's a couple books that are in the back of my mind. One actually on divorce, because I thankfully had a really good divorce, and I feel like there's not enough resources out there for people. But
Really
I
good.
felt like, okay, this chapter is done, and I'm ready to go on to something else. Like, I want to create something else, and I think of myself as a creator, as an entrepreneur. I built a couple of companies. I like to do product design. I designed my two homes when people thought I was crazy. I read all these like design books, and so I like to create things. But the fiction thing for me was like, okay, I want to do this, but met with a lot of resistance. Even Mark Resnick, who's a close friend of mine and a senior editor at St. Martin's Press, he's like, God, you and John are great, but you guys are nonfiction. Like, you don't have the chops for this, kind of like hinting at that, right? And that just it put more fuel on the fire. And I was like, okay, John and I we gotta
Just watch
prove
me.
them wrong. And that's kind of that's what got us started. And I mean, it's amazing to see the reaction to the book from, I think, especially from writers that John and I really respect in the genre. And now we're just excited that we think we got something special here, and we want to, we want to carry on the series. Like John said, we're kind of hopefully wrapping up book 2, going into book 3. And I feel like we've got a winner here, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, having.
Oh, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, for years I've been just the most enormous fan of Lee Child and Robert Crace, and having these guys, Brad Thor, people like this, say nice things about our book is like having Hemingway and Fitzgerald and people reach out they happen to say, "You've done good, guys." It's like, holy cow, those guys are my heroes. So it's wild to suddenly be in this crime writer's world. It's a whole new world, but we're having the time of our life.
Well, Brandon, I loved your answer because it reminds me a lot of Jack Carr when he was first asked when he came out. Which, ironically, by the way, I think it was Brad Thor on Soft Rep with you and someone else let it slip that he was delivering a manuscript on his behalf to Emily Bessler. That was like the first time that his name ever popped up. But I
know him. I know him very well. And I think it's great, and I think what also is great is how supportive Brad has been, because we're kind of in the same plane in the same pond, and a lot of guys don't like that, they're just like, they wouldn't give a helping hand. So I think it speaks to Brad's character, that he's just a good stand-up guy.
Yeah.
I think you'll find Thriller Fest in this crime writing world very collegial and very friendly. And certainly, like I said, I hope you guys will come join us at Thriller Fest. Super fun. And I really admire you because I actually went from medical writing to fiction writing. And I know it's hard to switch gears and kind of have, instead of telling, going the showing and the dramatization of, a story. So congrats to you both for breaking through that barrier.
Thank you.
We worked for 2 years on the book, and it was simmering in Brandon's mind for 25 years, which is very impressive. And I'd love to actually hear about where it first started. But what were a few of the real sticking points and critical decisions you also had to make together?
Who's first?
You can go. I'm going to think about it. Think about this.
One, I think, critical decision really early on was in a very, very early draft of the book. the killer's identity was known from day one.
Yeah.
And we kind of followed the killer's mind through, and there was an early decision. No, we're going to hang on to that. We're going to turn this into a whodunit. And I think that was the right decision. I think it was the right decision for the story. And then I think a second really critical decision was to was the creation of Finn, the main character, about whom I won't say much, but just to say that he's got a really complicated past and is a damaged individual. You want to root for him, but you also want to figure out what on earth is going on with this guy. And I think those two engines, the whodunit of who is this killer, and also we see Finn, but who is this guy? Those two engines, kind of drive the book.
Yeah, and that's credit to you as well, John. Like that, when I handed you over the scraps of like 15,000 words or whatever. Yeah, no, those are key decisions for sure.
It was just so much fun to take, because Brandon had been cooking this idea for a long time. And, as you know, like you were saying, Kim, it's grounded in real events, grounded in his real experiences. So it had this kind of like this massive root system. But once we wanted to try to sprout it and turn it into something that flourished, like all the decisions about where to go with the story were just such a blast to kind of work out piece by piece by piece. And we really do it as a collaboration. We've been doing this for 7 books, so we have kind of a rhythm the way that we work together, and it's really fun because it's almost like ESP sometimes. I'll shoot him an email, he'll throw back a couple words, and I'll throw back 2-3 words, and got it, cool.
And I would say most of the main characters are based off real people, like or a combination of.
Yeah. There's a lot of real people hovering behind those cutouts. That's right.
That'll be an interesting, like 20 years from now, we'll like reveal the real names behind.
Yeah.
I think your phone's gonna blow up when the book comes out. You have people that you served with, like, is this me on page 84? I think you're gonna get a lot of that, which kind of segues to my next question. Okay, so it's tough to whittle these down. We each get to ask 5 questions here. It's 10 questions, so I had to cut some of mine. But I picture you guys, like if Brandon has an idea, and John saying, "Look, no one will believe that," and him saying, "No, that's real. Trust me." Because thriller writers love to say that. Truth is stranger than fiction, right? Everyone from Brad Thor to Stephen King says that. And by the way, both have said in regards to various current events over the last year or so that if they wrote some of the things that we're seeing happen today in a book even 5 years ago, no one would have believed it. So, Brandon, is there anything from your time in the military that's so crazy and real that no one would believe it if you wrote it into a thriller? And then, John, to you, is there anything that he's wanted to do, even in the nonfiction world, where you couldn't believe it was real?
So my answer would be yes, absolutely. There also is, there are a lot of insider baseball stuff that happens in the special ops community, and the Navy SEALs, which is very sensitive. Like I've touched on it a little bit on softrep.com, but there are a lot of things that I can just, push that throttle handle full forward and say, John, we know all this stuff really happened. Let's incorporate it, because it is super interesting and dramatic so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and from my side, I would say, has Brandon brought me anything where I've said, no, that's like too over the top, man? I mean, the answer to that is no. No, bring it on, man. I'm like Giles Corey, more weight. And now we're hip deep into the second book. Not to say much about that, but there's stuff in the second book that maybe 10 years ago I would have said, nah, no way, but no way. So yeah, it is the world is a strange place. It is bizarre. Truth is stranger than fiction, and fiction is sort of more real than a lot of nonfiction. So this is a good place to bring it out.
Well, I think after the last year, we all think anything's possible. So,
Yeah.
so John, I read a fascinating quote, from you in another interview where you approach every book as a musical composer. Love that. Can you explain how you do that and what your approach is? And can you offer any tips for people who maybe aren't musical but are writers, that how they can incorporate that into their work?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Well, my training originally was as a musician. I grew up as a classical musician, as a composer, and uh, composer was my first career. That's what I was going to do with my life. My plans keep, not working out. They keep changing on me. So, um, but it's still kind of my first language, my lingua franca. It's kind of where I think in music. And so part of, in terms of writing, part of that is structural, which is, there are a lot of pieces of classical music where you'll have a theme in the early part of the piece, then suddenly it comes back at the end. And there's this cyclic nature of that, like the snake eating its tail. And so I love in movies, where they call it setup and payoff, where they plant this little detail in the first act that doesn't seem significant, and suddenly in Act 3, it's like, oh, it was that. I should have seen that coming. I love those kinds of structural things. But the other part of it is pacing. There's a thing to music where there's a time. It's like to everything there is a season. There's a time where you have the action just moving and moving and moving, and then when suddenly you need to just take it slow. Like there's this in the movie Minority Report. Tom Cruise is running away from the cops who are trying to catch him, and there's this incredibly intense action scene. And when it's all over, he has this like 15-minute conversation with this lady in a greenhouse, and the only reason it works is because you just came off 20 minutes of breathless action. So the kind of changing up of your pace and of the rhythm and of the intensity. People who don't have a musical background, what I would just say is pay attention to that in your favorite writing. Pick up your favorite novels, whether they're crime novels or some other kind of novel, and just notice, step back as you're reading and notice what the author does in pacing, in rhythm, in changing up the tone and intensity. Because if it's going to really have a life that grips readers for 500 pages or 400 pages, man, you can't be monotonous. You got to be changing it up in a really beautiful way.
And Brandon, do you have any musical background at all, or?
No, my parents, other than my parents, are hippies, and my dad is a musician. But but I did grow up in a really kind of environment that encouraged creativity. Definitely. John, you were talking about Tom Cruise. My daughter failed her driver's test today. She's devastated. She didn't make it out of the parking lot. She backed out and rubbed this. I guess she just rubbed the fender on this lady's car next to her, and I sent her that Tom Cruise scene with Robert Duvall, where they're on the racetrack, rubbing his racing. Or that I forget the name of that movie, but I sent her that YouTube scene. So I was like, don't worry about it. Just tell her,
awesome.
Tell your instructor Robin's racing.
I have 6 kids, and I'm pretty sure a lot of your parenting moments can come from Tom Cruise moments, in my experience. Not for nothing, but my oldest daughter can't pass her test because she can't parallel park. So I'm right there with you. You both are so busy. Like, you guys are involved in so many different things, so many different projects. How do you keep everything straight? And then when it comes to fiction versus nonfiction, has there been any challenges that you did not foresee making the jump into the fiction side?
So, for me, focus is definitely a big thing, right? John and I wrote Total Focus just based on that experience. So I do think my experience as a SEAL has taught me that we are much, much more capable of output than we give ourselves credit for. I think most people set the bar way, way, way too low. And if you really think about your day, or in a day that's been extremely productive, it's probably because you really use your time effectively. So that to me has been that experience in the SEAL teams and being pushed, and I was talking with my son the other night about it. Just that work ethic the SEAL teams gave me, like in the kind of can-do attitude of my platoon chief says, "Hey, we need a forklift driver," and I have to go to forklift school and learn how to drive a forklift in a couple days and take the test. So it was just something like, okay, I'm going to do this. So as far as having all this stuff going on, yeah, no, it's a constant battle because I do like to take on projects personally, but I like the fact that John and I are focused on this series now, and that's kind of the bulk of my creative writing is going into this, and then the challenge is always there, right? Like what do you say no to?
Yeah.
And then as far as the second part of the question you asked, has there been any like surprises?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm going to school all over again. As much as I like finished Stephen King's On Writing, I'm like, all right, I'm ready to rush into this thing, and just started writing Steel Fear, and then sent the 15,000 word seeds over to John, and he's like, okay, this is a good start, but we need to like just rip everything apart and start over. And to see kind of what he's done has been incredibly inspiring for me, because I am literally a very structured nonfiction writer. I outline, I have my plot mountain developed, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can knock it out. Fiction, I'm still kind of getting my groove, and I feel like my strength is in plot, but I need a lot of work on character development, and I've learned a lot working with John on this, and in practicing daily. I'm writing for practice so I can get better. A series chapter by chapter on SoftRep right now, usually every other week, and it's been fun, and it's been a learning experience, and I've sent some stuff to John as well. But yeah, I'm still I was, I guess, to make a long answer longer, I was surprised at how fucking hard it was. Like, it is not for the faint of heart. Like, it is really, you can't get lazy on character development. As much as sometimes you just like to like plug a hole, you can't do it. Like, you really have to put in the work. And it's much, much more difficult for me than writing nonfiction, which I've been at for a while now.
Yeah, man, I'm with you on that. It's, I hit both those questions too, but real quickly. But the first one, as far as so many projects, so many things, I've always been, multi-interested, doing 1,000 things. For me, a lot of it is just intensity. It's just the intensity of the one thing I'm doing right now and kind of giving it my all. I've really had to learn how to say no. I've said no to a lot of things. I've said no to book projects. I've said no to authors. I've said no to income. I've said no to job opportunities. I've said no to a lot more than I've said yes to. And for years, I remember I would tell my wife, I would love someday to be living in a world where I'm working on one book at a time. Just let me write one book at a time. And I've gotten to the point just in this last year of realizing, I don't wish that anymore, because when I have 3 or 4 projects in different phases of development, I'm picking up one and working on it for a month or for 3 weeks, and the others are all hovering, and they're all kind of, they're kind of bubbling in the back of the stove. But I'm always focused on one at a time, and that's just been really, really critical. It's I guess I kind of learned that as a musician, learning how to play the cello, focusing on that instrument. But the second question about the challenges in the fiction writing, I agree with Brandon. It surprised me how hard it is. What's also surprised me, I tasted this in the nonfiction world, but in the fiction world, it's like 1,000 times more so. What surprised me is how much better it can get. Yeah. How much better a page can get, a paragraph can get, a character can get, a plot can get, how much better a whole book can get. When we turned in our manuscript to our agent, I thought it was done. 150,000 words, 151,000. Oh, that was great. Brandon and I both were like, we're done, man. This is like, take it to market. And she was like, hey guys, this is really, really great. You got to take out 50,000 words. It's like, what? But they're all good words. They're some of the best words. They all use good letters. And we spent months just, honing it. I have a friend who brought a manuscript to her agent, and the agent said, she thought it was done. The agent said, it's great, but, you have to take out blah, blah. And she told me she remembered her husband finding her crying in the shower. And she said, I can't do it. I've done my best. I've put my best into it. And she said she got out and went to a room and thought about it. And she came down again and said, you know what? I realized I got to do better than my best. Yeah. That's what a SEAL is. That's what you got to be if you want to write a thriller that works. It's got to be above the bar that you think is your top bar. And I think that's what we've both really learned about this book process. Is like, it can get so much better before it's ready.
Well said, John. I mean, I think writing is really rewriting. You first get
yes.
down, and then you just keep rewriting until, and I don't even think it's ever done. I think the deadline, and then you say, okay, it's I have to submit it now. There's no two ways about it. So yeah, and I don't know, like, I think if you really want to enjoy this life and the fiction, you have to be a fanatic about craft and about
yes.
and about the journey of learning how to be a
and
better
love it. And love it. You have to love the craft. You have to have a real passion for the craft. I agree totally.
Exactly. So we talked a little bit earlier about your characters and how they're based on real life people, and I'm fascinated by Captain Eagleberg. And I don't know how much you can tell us about this, but I'm really intrigued. You talked about leadership. Can you dive a little bit more into the captain, and the reason you chose that personality type?
I mean, I'll take first pass. This was a true representation of the real captain on board the Lincoln. And I remember coming off the Lincoln, which was a nuclear powered carrier, knowing I was going on to a conventional carrier the following year, the Kitty Hawk, which is, I don't know how many years older than like 50, 60 years older. And I was thinking to myself, oh man, this is going to be such a drag. I was on this ship, which kind of sucked anyway. And now I got to like move on to this other boat. And the Kitty Hawk was night and day, incredibly better than the newer ship. And what, John and I figured out through writing The Red Circle, it was all about leadership. It was the fact that the captain was engaged with the crew, morale was high, the ship was clean, just like night and day. And here was this much older ship that was just a much better experience. And back to the Lincoln in Eagleburg, it was based on a guy that never spoke to the crew, never heard the captain. I think maybe once in 6 months he came over the main speaker to say something, and it was probably derogatory. The ship had the worst accident rate in the fleet. Like, it was just, and it all comes down to leadership. And I think that, like, that character was just there. It was just like, laid up for John and I to just, put. And again, this was, the same guy that was in charge for real was dealing with this sexual predator on the boat, and really never caught the guy, never came over the 1MC to like make women comfortable, like maybe make a statement like, hey, we're doing our best, and blah blah blah. Like, it was just nothing. It was just like people were scared, and even and then that just fed off itself, that negativity, that leadership void. And I remember having a conversation with Mona. She was, the officers would send their laundry to be done, and she would get her laundry back, and there was these like notes in her laundry bag from these creepers that were just like totally derogatory. Like, it just, like, everything snowballed worse and worse because of this guy's just lack of leadership and spine. And so, I mean, that character was kind of in the bag to John and I. Like, we knew him very well.
And I think everybody knows Eagleburg. everybody has seen Eagleburg many times, right? And the thing that's so interesting to me about him is that, like, there's two villains really in the story. I mean, you got somebody who's killing people in a really horrible way, right? He's like evil incarnate. Eagleburg isn't evil; he's mediocre, which is like almost worse. It's like he's mediocre and he's egocentric and he's self-important, and it's like, no, he's not psychopathic, but the evil that happens, the results that happen because of, and Brandon said it perfectly, it's like not a leadership, it's a leadership void.
Yeah.
Because of his abdication of leadership.
Facilitates that whole environment, which
yeah,
the killer just takes full advantage.
Yeah. And how many of us have seen that happen, in businesses and stores and, communities and families and congregations everywhere? It's like, yeah, crappy leaders who just abdicate their role. And it's like infecting creating a terrible immune system. All kinds of bad stuff's going to happen.
Well, it's like the EU's distribution of the vaccine, right? It's like crazy.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about moving nonfiction to fiction, but this is not just like a one and done. This is the first in a series, right? So I'm fascinated by the world building. So what is your process like when you started book one? Were you thinking 2-3 books down the road? Are you thinking ahead on this, or are you just taking it one at a time here?
I think that was actually one of the surprises for me, anyway. That this was the origin story of a hero's origin story, and I don't, John, I don't think you and I had this discussion. It was Anne saying, "I want another book out of you guys," unless I'm missing something. Like, that was kind of a surprise to me, a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, and I remember kind of going, somewhere along the line, thinking this guy would be a great series hero because his life is complicated, his past is complicated, and his past isn't. And I'm not giving any spoilers, I don't think, to say this. His past is not fully explained in Steel of Fear. It's somewhat, but there's still a lot of uncovered territory. But I remember when we first, were talking about a 2-book deal and about a series. I remember thinking, okay, aircraft carrier. Now what do you do? Submarine, airplane, in a really big truck. I was like, what's the next large vehicle? And we could have done that, and instead we wanted to take some strange alien or anyway unusual environment. I can say that we took it to Iceland. That's where book 2 happens. So every book we're going to look for an environment that is like a character unto itself as part of the book. But they will not all be boats, probably.
And that was something I think John and I had spent some time on, dissecting Steel Fear and going, okay, what are the fundamental parts of this story that really make it interesting? And the environment was one.
Yeah.
And so, like, identifying these key components so we can like bring that forward into the other books, I think, is important, because even the mixing of genres, right? We don't want to just like fall back and just like write the next book as a military, purely military book. We want that kind of Agatha Christie component going forward.
Actually, I love the fact that you guys have mixed the genre somewhat, with kind of like military thriller in a way, but at the same time, Agatha Christie closed door mystery. And these are really hot in the market right now. So, I think you're well set for the future.
We really wanted it to be a book where people who love military thrillers could love this, but you don't have to have a military, aspect to love this. You can come from the other side and equally love it. And so we don't want to shut out either group.
And it'll be entertaining and educational, which I think is also a huge plus. I don't know about you, but whenever I read a fiction, novel, I really want to learn something. I want to put it down and feel like I have developed as a person or grown or seen something interesting.
Yes.
So,
I feel the same way. I read, and that's why I force myself to read fiction still, because I do love a lot of books like Gladwell's Blank and stuff like that. But I read Ready Player One. My son recommended it to me, and I was blown away. I was like, this is the future of the internet. Like, it's going to be immersive and virtual. And that got me scared, thinking about, okay, how do I, as a content producer and a media company owner, how do I plan for this? Because this is coming. So I think that's something I really enjoy out of reading fiction, is it just kind of nudges that part of the brain. And it could be, you can draw out extremely valuable stuff reading fiction, where I feel like a lot of people miss out. They're just no, I don't. I just stick to nonfiction books.
Yeah.
Sounds
Stick to
good.
my knitting.
Just before we wrap up, because I, being immersed in the world of kidnap and ransom for the last several years, I'm curious, if you were kidnapped, what would be the one thing you would take with you?
Oh my God.
I'm taking Brandon, by the way. I mean, he literally so I'm taking Brandon.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea.
Any thoughts? I've had some really interesting answers, from peanut butter, if you can believe it, to my dog.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of something useful, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I carry this tactical flashlight everywhere I go, because I think it's one of the best self-defense tools you can have. It's 1,000 lumens. You can blind somebody in the daylight, and you can take it on the airplane, right? It's like airplane safe. That's one of the most handy tools I have, but I don't know if that would help me in a kidnap situation. Yeah, I feel like I could MacGyver my way out of it somehow.
How about you, John?
I mean, it would be great to take my phone, but I'm not sure that they would let me keep it, so that would be kind of useless. Now, honestly, I think the first thing I think that I would want to bring with me is my wife. She's very resourceful. She's smarter than I am. So if I can't figure something out, she can, and she would probably, figure out some aspect or angle to where we were that would never have occurred to me. If I get stuck in a problem, that's where I go. What's that?
My goal is not to get kidnapped in the first place.
Yeah.
I did. So I've been living in Mexico City, and my editor of Software, Sean Spoons, is I'm about to promote him to the editor in chief, but he started dropping a series on the Mexican drug cartel and how they're manufacturing cocaine now in Mexico to streamline the supply chain. I was like, Sean, are you trying to get me kidnapped here? Like, killing me, buddy. Like, no more cartel stories. Like, I'm in Mexico City, for Christ's sake. So, yeah.
That's great. Well, listen, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure spending time with you. Good luck with the release, and we're here to support you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.